Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ULT Study Abroad 101. I'm Shefali Shrivastava, Marketing and Communication Manager at University Hill. We are back with another amazing session that will assist students accelerate their journey towards their dream study destination, Australia. We're joined by Ravi Lochan Singh, MD Gloalreach, President of AAERI. Ravi has been representing leading universities from around the world for 29 plus years. I don't need to elaborate further. Ravi's knowledge and insight are awe-inspiring. Welcome, Ravi. Thank you so much for joining us despite your busy schedule.
Well, thanks, Shefali. Thank you very much.
So I'm sure that people are aware about AAERI, but what is AAERI and how does it help students? I'll start right into the questions.
So perfect. Well, AAERI stands for Association of Australian Education Representatives in India. It was established in 1996 through an initiative of the Australian High Commission in New Delhi. It's actively supported by the Department of Home Affairs, which looks after visas. It's been promoted by Department of Education and also by the Department of Trade, which is Austrade. Now, what happens is most of the Australian regulations around the way international education is promoted is limited by the territory of Australia. So let's say the rules or regulations or the laws of India will not extend beyond India. So similarly, there is a very major Australian act called the Esos Act, which protects the rights of the overseas students studying in Australia. Now, by way of AAERI, what happens is the AAERI members actually agree to abide by the Esos Act. So even though Australian regulations don't extend to India per se, but because our members are members of an association which is registered in India, and as a part of that process have agreed to follow or abide by the Esos Act, we are in fact making the industry much cleaner and much more regulated. So it's a way of self-regulation. Now, what's happened over the years is that almost all education representatives of universities in Australia working in the higher education space primarily are members of AAERI. Now, today, after 25 years, now it's all this 26th year this year for AAERI, close to 115 agencies are members of it. And if we include the branches, then that would mean well over 500, 600 branches of AAERI members across India. Now, this is a massive network. And my gut feel is that close to 80% of all students going to Australia would have taken help of an AAERI member. So that's in a very summary form. Now, when we are looking at our next few years, we are working on an AAERI 2.0. That means some changes to AAERI. And we are soon going to be launching a trusted and accredited education specialist logo very soon, because there's a new code of conduct which has come into play. And our expectation is that with time, visas lodged through an AAERI member will be streamlined and would be processed faster than those lodged by non-AAERI members. And I think that's going to be a very major step going forward in the next couple of months.
Of course, ease of convenience, I must say. So by when we can expect this new code of conduct and everything in line?
The new code of conduct is already in place, and it has already been signed by the majority of AAERI members. Well over 100 members have signed it. It requires certain measures at the end of the education agent's counselor. I mean, who they need to do verifications and take responsibility for the documents being put forward to the universities and to the Australian government for the visas. So I think this is a very major plus first step. The next step is that there's going to be a micro-credential which is being developed currently by the Australian government, which our members will undertake. And once they have done that, then there'll be a new logo which will be put out for those who have cleared these two steps. So in some ways, there's an AAERI, but within AAERI, there would be something called Trusted and Accredited Australian Education Specialists. So all this will happen over the next 2 or 3 months. And our expectation is that by 17th of August, when AAERI convention takes place in Delhi, we would have a large number of AAERI members who would have cleared both the micro-credentials and would have signed the undertaking or the new code. So I think it's a good time ahead for the next couple of months.
Great. I can say, we can say like that AD is the big brother or big sister for students who are traveling to Australia for study purpose.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think what happens is whenever the industry grows, like any industry, you've got, let's say if you go to hospitals, then there are good and bad hospitals, good and bad doctors, good and bad lawyers. Similarly, in our industry, in India, I would say there'll be thousands of people trying to be education agents or trying to advise students to study overseas. And frankly, there's lots of fraud, lots of activities taking place, but it helps students find who are more, compared to others, who are the more dependable education counselors they can go to. And I think that's our goal in the short and the medium term, that how to differentiate an AAERI member from a non-AAERI member. There is just no reason why somebody would not be an AAERI member if they're working for Australia, and if they really want to conduct themselves ethically and in the right way.
Right. You also have another venture, Gloalreach. How does Gloalreach comes into the picture, and how you help students traveling abroad from that platform?
Oh, wonderful. Gloalreach is actually my company where I am the current managing director. Now, the thing with it is that AAERI is not my company. AAERI is an association where many companies like Gloalreach or IDP or, you name it, all the other agencies which are in the industry, they all come together to bring some kind of a self-regulation to the industry. Now, today, I am the president of AAERI, but tomorrow I may not be the president of AAERI. But as far as Gloalreach is concerned, this is a company which I set up in 1991. It has now completed 3 decades. We are in our 31st year now. And this continues to be amongst the top agencies in the subcontinent. Certainly one of the earliest in the subcontinent to represent Australian universities. But today it represents universities from around the world. And we are headquartered in Calcutta in India, and has its footprint at about 35 locations in the subcontinent, including being in Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka outside of India. We are probably one of the larger agencies in Nepal. We are the first ones in Bhutan, and we have the largest market share in Bhutan. We have the largest market share in Eastern India. We've got a fairly large market share in Central India, in Rajasthan, and also in various other parts of the region. And one of our more recent presence has been Sri Lanka. Of course, currently the situation in Sri Lanka is not necessarily ideal, but we continue to do our bit in the entire region. So outside of Pakistan, we have presence in all the locations in South Asia.
That's quite interesting. And you cater to other locations as well, apart from Australia over there.
Of course, Australia's got about 40 odd universities. And so we represent all Australian universities. Now, when I say all, means we represent every single university in Australia, and that makes us very unique. I can't think more than 1 or 2 agencies in the entire world which can actually claim to represent every single university in Australia. Other than that, we represent all universities from New Zealand, all the 8 universities. We represent over 100 universities in UK. We've got universities in Canada. We've got US. So overall, we represent well over 500, 600 institutions from around the world. People recognize us with Australia. They tend to think, okay, because I live in Australia and because the company started with Australia. But you'll be surprised, Shefali, we do fairly large numbers to other countries as well.
Yeah, in fact, my next question is going to be around, because of course it comes out like Australia is very near and dear to your heart. So what makes Australia as a very unique study abroad destination? Like, Australia has been as #1 for a very long time, and now it is again coming back into the picture.
Well, I think we have to go a little deeper into why a student wants to study overseas. Now, we've got different types of students or different aspirations of students. There are some students who are looking at doing research. Then they aren't so concerned about the country, but they are more into looking into what kind of scholarships and was the specialization of the university, which can offer them a place, etc. So I think historically, there are research students who are looking beyond the country, but looking more into the university and whether they can get some scholarship, etc. Then we have students who are studying overseas to get a degree and come back and join them dad's business or something else back home. Now that's also there. And then they are also not looking at the country per se, but they're looking more so onto the ranking of universities and how strong a brand it is. Then we got the large chunk of students, which I would say about 70–80% of the Indian students going overseas, who are more or less looking at studying overseas in a country which can allow them to work for a few years or settle thereafter. Now, this is a very important part. Not everybody wants to settle forever overseas, but they do want to work for a few years, get some return on the investment that they have made in education, because education is also a kind of an investment. So when you really look at it, all major countries now offer what is referred to as post-study work. Now, that means that if you finish a degree, you are allowed to work for a couple of years, get some experience locally, and also possibly earn some money, which can give them a return on what they have already spent in the first 1 or 2 or 3 years of their studies. Australia has done very well in terms of offering this return on investment. Now, if I was, when I came to Australia in 1990, I came as a student too. And I studied at Delhi University's SRCC in Delhi University. And then I was looking at going overseas to study. And nobody used to consider studying in Australia at that point of time. I remember only 200 students had come to Australia to study in 1990. And getting a visa was no real big deal. You could walk into the visa office and wait there, and somebody would stamp your passport and give it back to you. So when I came here to Australia to study in 1990, from Delhi University, I don't want to call myself the first ones to arrive here, but we were amongst the first lot which came as full fee paying students. Prior to that, the students who would come to Australia would come on various kind of scholarships or some kind of a arrangement between the two governments. But when we came in 1990, we were amongst the first group of students who came as fee paying students. So and there were a couple of us. So when we started at that point of time, we never thought what we would do thereafter. And I tell you, this is what has been with a lot of Indian students over the years, that when we study overseas, we don't really think what we would do after the degree. And when you think of it, 1990 was a time when there was no internet, there is no email. You had very scant information on what you could do and what you couldn't do. At least for going to US, you had something called the USEFI. If you wanted to go to UK, you had a British council you could go to. But if you wanted to study in Australia, there was really no place where you could go and get the information. There was no one stocking the brochures. So after we came back from Australia, when we studied in Australia, then this idea came to us, at least a couple of us, and we thought that why not set up something like this back home, kind of a library that a student would walk in and have all the 40-odd brochures in that office, and they could make a choice, and we could help that student study overseas. And that's how the industry took birth. Of course, over the years, there are many other things which have happened. And then we realized that the rules are changing around the world, and students do want to study and live there. And there are a couple of countries in the world which encourage it. So like countries like Canada, or say New Zealand, or even Australia, they actively have a skilled migration program where students with certain skills have it a little easier finding work and settling down. And that's really how Australia started to build a little niche in the Indian space. So today, if there is a student coming to Australia, they are often looking for degrees which lead them to a skill which is in relative short supply in Australia. So let's say IT or engineering, or let's say we see nursing and healthcare, and there are teaching. There are various skills which Australia needs workers in. And this is where our bright young students find it a little easier. Firstly, they're coming from a country which speaks the local language. The language is exactly the same because Bulk of us have studied in English medium schools or studied in environment where English is spoken pretty easily. So that's one real plus point for Indian students coming to Australia as compared to, say, Chinese or Thai or students from any other part of the world. So that's something which has worked. And over the last 20 years, we have seen a significant increase of students also studying vocational areas like hotel management, etc., which they've made Australia as their preferred destination over any other destination. So today I can tell you, of course, the borders have been closed for the last 2 years or maybe more than 2 years. But once they opened up, people thought, I mean, Australia probably would not be a country in the reckoning because it was one of the countries which opened the borders a little later than others. But what we have been seeing in the last few months is that there seems to be a pent-up demand and lots of interest in Australia. The visas, number of students applying for visas has increased. In fact, that led to a kind of a bottleneck because visas were taking even up to 10 weeks to be processed because there were that many more Indian students applying for student visas to Australia. So that's the current situation where market has returned. Students are looking at Australia because it offers very attractive post-study work and it has a pathway to even live and work thereafter. And I think that's one of the big draws, apart from the fact that large numbers of Australian universities figure in the top rankings. If I say 40 universities or 42 universities in Australia, and if I tell you that 8 of them figure in top 100 in the world, that makes it 20% of all Australian universities figuring in top 100 in the world, which is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. And if I look at all 40 universities, then possibly most of them will be in the top 500 in the world. And when I look at India, our best university is just around 500 mark, which is the Delhi University. So when you really look at it, bulk of Australian universities are figuring so well in ranking and it offers a return on investment. What else can we really look out for?
True, the quality of education has definitely one of the benchmark in Australia and especially for STEM and other such fields. Now, while we are walking down the lane, like you're sharing your experience, what made you choose Australia at that moment of time when there was so little information? And I believe most of the people were actually just running towards US.
Absolutely. At that time, I would say, Shefali, I'm talking of 1990. The situation in 1990 was very different in India. We had kind of protests around reservations happening in India. I was in Delhi University. And for me also at that time, my first preference country was US. And I had admission at some of the top universities in the US, had taken the GMAT, etc., while being in Delhi University. But the problem was that the Delhi University offered degrees in 3 years, and most of the top universities required us to have 16 years of education. So my offer of admissions were mostly like with a kind of a condition that I would have had to study for another year at Delhi School of Economics or do something and then only go to the US, and which I thought was not necessarily the ideal thing to happen. I had done a 3 years bachelor's, which was complete in its sense. It was an honors bachelor's from a top college in Delhi University. And I was looking for an opportunity to study overseas thereafter. And Australia at that time, for me, appeared just out of, I don't know how I got to know of it, but when I considered Australia, I thought that it was a great mix. Let me go and study in Australia. And if I don't like it after a year, I can still go to the US thereafter. Why study another 1 year doing an MCOM or doing an MA just to fill the 16 years of education, which I didn't want to do? So I went off because Delhi University was in a political turmoil in 1990 because of what we refer to in India as a Mandal agitation, which was on at that time. And at that time, my parents and all of us, we wanted to leave and move away. And I didn't have an intention to study for another year in doing a degree, which I really didn't want to study. So I went off to Australia to Bond University, which offered me a place in the MBA program. And at that time, MBA was something which all of us studied it for. Now today, it's lost a bit of a shine. So at that time, when I studied for 1 year, and it was a 3-semester program, and from Bond, I went to US to do a part of my degree at university. I mean, I got credits at University of Texas at Austin. And when I compared around the world, I thought that was a wonderful country to study in, and something kind of an uncharted territory for most Indians. And you'll be surprised after that, after when I returned back to my family business, which was in publishing and printing, and it's a 100-year-old publishing and printing business. And I came back, and most people, if they were considering to study overseas, to go to, say, Australia, they would contact me and say, oh, what was your experience like? And this is how the business also took place. You know, like when you think of it, there were actually 3 friends of ours who studied together. We were roommates. We thought that there's a vacuum here. We are a marketing people. We've studied marketing. Let's try to offer a service for students and provide them some guidance before they can leave.
Right, right. So I think your story is similar to the university living story, where Mayank and Saurav saw that there's a huge gap for the accommodation, and they came back and they started doing this university living over here.
Absolutely. See, the thing with your space, of course, you are operating in a time when we have internet and it's possible to look up the options. Think of a time when there was no internet and you're still trying to book an accommodation. So when I came to study, I mean, the only thing you could do is go through the university for the accommodation. And I arrived and I took up an accommodation in a university. Being a vegetarian student, struggled with getting vegetarian food in 1990. The university did not understand what vegetarianism is all about. They offered me seafood, assuming that to be vegetarian. It was very difficult. And then a handful of us, we decided that we've had enough of it. And we wanted to move out and find an accommodation which we could share and stay together. Now, the thing with us is, at that time, I can tell you that it's fine. It was possible to do that. But today, it's much easier with you guys. I mean, people can look up the options online. They can book their accommodation. They can look at the photos of what their rooms will look like. All that wasn't possible in our time. So I don't want to say that it was so difficult or whatever, but there were less number of students traveling also. Today, if everybody wants to book an accommodation with the university, they may or may not even find the accommodation. And that's why the options have increased and things have changed.
Right. Internet has actually, changed the whole scenario, repainted the whole painting. And now with COVID in the picture in the last 2 years, internet and digitalization has gone to another level altogether. My next question is around these new COVID variants. Now the old COVID isn't gone. So are there any kind of policy and any changes would you like to mention for the students who are traveling to Australia this year?
Well, I'll tell you one big change, which is people have accepted COVID. And that's something which is most important part as far as Australia is concerned. We've got elections on right now. In 2-3 days, there'll be a new government happening in Australia. But I don't see anybody wearing masks on the street. We've got more cases in Australia per day as compared to what India puts out every day. But there used to be a time that even with one case or one infection, the city would go into a lockdown. Today, nobody bothers about it because there has been a lot more changes medically. Almost everybody on the street is fully vaccinated. For us, fully vaccinated doesn't end at 2 vaccines. Now, most of them have had what we refer to as a booster dose, which is of a different vaccine. So compared to India, where the precaution or the booster dose is of the same vaccine, here in Australia, what they do is the third dose is of a different vaccine because more vaccines are available. So if, say, somebody's had AstraZeneca, they go out and have a Pfizer as a third dose. And I would say that, so that's the one difference here. So almost anybody who's arriving in Australia, fully vaccinated, don't need to really worry about anything. Even if, say, they are not fully vaccinated, I mean, they are fully vaccinated, but they've not had a booster, they don't need to bother about it. They can get the third dose here in Australia. It's available plenty and it's for free. Then comes the next thing is what happens thereafter. That's the only requirement. Beyond that, if you fall unwell or if something happens, there is pretty decent medical care to take care of you. Your medical insurance covers it. Every student has a medical cover. And I don't think there is anything to worry about as far as COVID is concerned. People have accepted it, and I think that's the most important part of it. I wouldn't say that there are no one getting infected. All people do get infected. They stay at home, give it a couple of days, and after 4th or 5th day, they are more or less fine. And in 7 days, they can be out and about, and they don't even need to take another test to prove that they are better. In fact, Australia has removed the RT-PCR requirement also for arriving students, as long as they are fully vaccinated. So I think we've stopped talking about COVID per se. I think it's become a part of our life. It's like flu that we are living with. It's endemic now. In fact, we don't even use the word pandemic anymore, and things are changing.
Yeah, now COVID is actually becoming a new normal, and it's general cold and flu these days. And I remember a conversation from our earlier one of the webinars where you and Sagar was also there, and you guys mentioned that how Australian government has taken all the things to another level on the medical ground, and you guys were the first one to get vaccinated, most of the people over there. So
yeah. Close to 95% of the population is vaccinated, fully vaccinated. And the remaining 5% is mostly in countryside or rural area who really don't have much of an interaction with the urban population. So we are on a very sound footing now.
Right. Of course, things have changed during this COVID as well, and the time internet has also changed a lot. But there's still few factors that one should take in consideration while traveling abroad for study purpose or for any other purpose. So, as a student point of view, where you have also been a student, what are the factors one should take in account?
Regarding COVID, I think generally.
Yeah, regarding COVID as well and studying abroad as well. Yeah.
Well, I think studying abroad, I think we should be very focused on studying on campus. I think this is very, very important. A big realization has been that the online education has not really become the norm. In fact, it's not even preferred. Yes, you could do online lectures, but you would still, it's ideal to be in the classroom and doing face-to-face. And in fact, when we really look at it, while in the short term, a lot of people studied online, and the Indian government also talked about online education, but Indian government still doesn't recognize online education. So I would say that online can only be a stopgap, but it cannot replace the regular traditional learning. So I know there are some edtech ventures which are trying to promote online education or a way to get a degree, but you've got to keep in mind that international education is not only getting a degree, it's the entire experience. It's being in another country. It's the idea of working part-time. It's the idea of meeting with people from different cultures. It's the idea of being on your own. It's the idea of being away from your family. I think it's very, very important that international education should not only mean a degree that we stick on the wall. And this is probably the main place where there are big edtech companies which are getting confused about. India already has enough number of colleges in private sector if you can't get into the top colleges otherwise. So why do you really need to spend money to go overseas? You go overseas because you want to experience a new life. And I think this is where, this is the most important reason why you need to study overseas. And this is what I would say to any, you ask me as a student, this is the reason why I came to study. I came to be away from the family, to do things on my own term. I wanted to start afresh, and that's what I did. And I would say the same applies to all students. Wherever you study, whichever country you may go to, international education is more than just getting a degree. If you really want a degree, then you don't need to spend all this money. So this is a very important, and I think Indian government and Australian government, they all recognize the importance of in-classroom learning. And this should be encouraged even more. Almost all countries are open now. I know we are talking about Australia. The only country which was not open till recent time was New Zealand. Even that has opened up or has announced that it's opening up from August. So I think all your destinations are open. Australia definitely is open. And I think it's the country which one should certainly consider.
True, it's all about the experience and the exposure they get when they travel abroad. It's about getting a reality check for themselves, because there's a lot of difference from having it to work in or study in a domestic country and to move abroad and to study over there. The scenario and the whole environment ecosystem changes completely, even for a student. So the experience is something that matters. And so definitely, the point you made is very valid. We're almost near our last closing time. I would just like to understand, is there any kind of career support that AE provides or initiative to the students?
Well, not really. AAERI doesn't provide anything to the student. AAERI is a way, it assures the student that the education agent whom they are working with is accredited and trusted. That's what AAERI does as an association. AAERI is not a counselor on its own. It's kind of a body which tries to self-regulate the work that is being done by individual education counselor of different agencies. So I would say the role of AAERI is more like a peak body, like an industry body, trying to regulate and trying to promote Australia as a study destination. Now, in the end, the students need to walk in, look up the names of the education agents on the AAERI website, see if they are a member. If they are a member, then also they need to do their own homework in terms of gauging which member, whether they work for the university or not. Every university by law needs to put out the list of the education agents on their website. The student must check the list of education agents on the website to make sure that they are going to the right people. The visas must be lodged by the education agent through whom the visa offer letter has been generated. This is a very important point which has to be noted. Let's say if a student has applied to Australia to an XYZ university, then the visa must be lodged through the agency through whom the offer letter has been received or has been generated. And they should not, these are some of the things they need to be very careful of. And there is no scope for fake or fraudulent documents as far as Australia is concerned. One mistake made by the student can really ruin their chances forever. One black mark can ruin all their chances even to travel as a tourist in future. So they have to make sure that there is absolutely no scope for fake or fraudulent documents. English levels has to be tested. There are multiple tests to test a student's English ability. It could be whether it's the Pearson's, TOEFL, IELTS, or whatever, the right score, whichever the university requires, and then use the education agents' offices to guide them. Most AAERI members would not charge a fee, or even if they charge, it's a very small fee because they are paid by the education providers or the universities for the service that they give to the student. So I think that's the assurance that AAERI can make to a student.
And that's a great assurance, I must say. In fact, it's very important for any student to do their due diligence on a regular basis. There have been a lot of scam recently in the news, and a lot of things are happening. And of course, you're going abroad, you need to do your due diligence and research quite well. Your homework needs to be on the top. So thank you so much, Ravi, for joining us. If there are any other last golden words that you want to share with our audience for this session.
No, fantastic work you guys have done over the last 2 years. I know your industry has been affected by COVID as much as ours because students have not been traveling. How would be they taking the accommodation when they reach a different country or reach the university? But I think times have changed. We do need to support our students, finding them the right accommodation in the cities. And I think all the best to you guys. Hopefully, you'll be able to help the students.
Thank you so much for joining us today. On this note, we'll be closing our session. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you guys on next Friday at 5 p.m. Stay tuned to our social media channels for more information. Thank you.